the American Congress is about to establish a new office in government that will look into unidentified aerial phenomena.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too. Yeah, I hope you got your resume all ready for that.
The what?
Your resume, your CV for getting involved. You're not getting.
I'm not interested in government positions.
No, okay.
No, because I will not be able to share any knowledge I have if I were to join the government.
Right.
No one will trust you. Ready to rock?
So, by the way, I'm Graham, and this is Darren.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, we're ready to go here anytime.
Okay, you can go ahead and start whenever you want. It's not recording right now, but
just hit it.
Avi Loeb.
Wait, no, I didn't hit that.
Oh, you didn't hit that
yet?
Okay, go for it.
All right.
Avi Loeb, welcome to Grimerica. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to join.
Yeah, this will be really fun. I mean, we don't have prominent scientists like yourself on very often. We have before, but your book Extraterrestrial was fantastic. The first signs of intelligent life beyond Earth. I mean, I really like the open-mindedness that you brought forward as a secular scientist to the book and all those projects that you're working on. So yeah, we got lots to talk about.
Well, just think of me as a farm boy. I haven't changed much since my childhood, and the way I see science is the privilege of maintaining my childhood curiosity. One of the most vivid memories I have as a kid was going to dinner and asking a difficult question, and then the adults in the room would pretend that they know the answer, and it was obvious they didn't have a clue. And that was the good situation. The worst situation was when they would dismiss the question simply because they didn't know the answer. And I thought that by becoming a scientist, I would be able to follow, to have this privilege of asking difficult questions and seeking the evidence to answer them, and that I will be surrounded by like-minded people. Because after all, in academia, you have the concept of tenure, where you have job security and you don't have to worry. You can take risks and ask difficult questions. And to my surprise, I still have adults in the room that pretend they know much more than they actually know, and some that are dismissing a question to which they don't know the answer.
And you're still asking the curiosity like questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because, what's the point? We live for such a short time. Let's just talk substance rather than pretend,
Well, right away, listening to your book, I was thinking about how much philosophy, your love for philosophy in the beginning must have played a role in your open-mindedness as a scientist.
Well, there were two things in my childhood that shaped my career. One is indeed the interest in the big questions, and I was mostly interested in philosophy. But then circumstances led me into physics and eventually astrophysics. And the second thing that what was true of my childhood was that I grew up on a farm, and I used to collect eggs every afternoon, and I became very much connected to nature, much more so than to people. I mean, you might say people are part of nature, but not really. I mean, people often destroy nature. And for example, since the pandemic started, I jog every morning at 5 a.m. in the company of birds, ducks, bunnies, and wild turkeys. And I enjoy that much more than the pre-pandemic routine of speaking with my colleagues at work. And there is something really innocent and interesting about nature. And space, by the way, is for me an extension of exploring nature.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I liked how you utilize some of your personal experiences from youth and in analogical ways to your science and your experiences as a scientist, like the tree, for example, speaking of nature, your tree branch one. I mean, it's things like that, right?
It's interesting that you noticed that because, there were many people that visited me after my book came out. I had about 1,300 interviews, but that was expected. Interviews for podcasts, for TV, radio, newspapers, magazines, and so forth. The thing that was not expected are the visitors that came to the porch of my home. I met with them in the porch because it was outdoors, and they didn't have to wear a mask, and I could sit with them on the rocking chair, and we would discuss why we might not be the smartest kid on the cosmic block. That is the motive of my book. And there were some very interesting visitors that came. We can talk about them, but two of them, when they came to the porch, they said, where is that branch that is mentioned in your book that was broken and you put insulation tape around it? And, I regard that as a symbol of helping young people when they are fragile. And then this branch now is the tallest in that tree. And even though people advised me to break it off, I put insulation tape, and it's now still surrounding it 15 years later. And I brought them to the branch. It's just next to the porch, and they took a selfie with it. So this branch is really a celebrity right now. And there were other interesting visitors. There was a couple that came, brought me a gift from their daughter, their small daughter, that it was a plant of a red oak tree. And I planted it in the backyard, and, she sent it as a symbol of trying to hope for a better future on Earth. And I had very wealthy individuals that came to the porch, asked me questions about my book, and that eventually inspired them to contribute money to my research fund, and I established the Galileo Project, on which we can talk later.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. So
I should tell you that there was one podcaster that said that he would have liked to be a fly on the wall of my porch to see all of these conversations about the Galileo Project and others.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You should mic your porch.
The one advantage of a fly is that one of the visitors was the principal investigator of the New Horizons mission to Pluto, and he's actually going to space next year. His name is Alan Stern, and he's a member of the Galileo Project. And if that fly knew that, he could have snuck under the shirt of Alan Stern and gone into space.
Been the first fly in space.
There must have been flies in space before.
Were you expecting all that media attention, that sort of circus when your book came out, when, the scientist is, I saw some of the headlines before we started here, and they're saying, this prominent science saying that something was, flew through our system that was not made or not natural. And were you expecting that kind of circus, or?
Well, there were parts of it that I didn't expect. The book became a bestseller in many countries, was translated to 25 languages. And the public, by and large, loved it. I had, just to give an example, about a month ago, I participated in a forum in the Washington National Cathedral. It was about our future in space. And other attendees were the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, Jeff Bezos from Blue Origins, and a theologian from Durham University, David Wilkinson. And the one thing that struck me, of course, the discussion was interesting, but after it ended, all of them left. And there was a long line of people waiting to speak with me. And I was very moved by it, because it took me half an hour to speak with the 50 people that stood in line. And they basically wanted to say how inspired they are by this kind of a scientific project to search for technological equipment from another civilization in space, something that was never done before. And, there is this poem by Robert Frost about taking the road not taken. He went to the woods and saw two roads, and one of them was not taken. He took it, and that made all the difference for him. For me, taking the road not taken has a great advantage, because there might be some low-hanging fruit, and because nobody took that road, that fruit may still be there. Nobody picked it up. So the advantage of establishing the Galileo Project along a path that nobody else took is that we might find some low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. What do you think about NASA? Do you think, they get they get accused of all sorts of tomfoolery over there and doctoring pictures and stuff like that. Did you get any sort of sense of that, or do you think they're just as curious as we are?
Well, the head of NASA, Bill Nelson, explicitly said in early June, around a few weeks before the Director of National Intelligence delivered the report to the U.S. Congress about unidentified aerial phenomena. So Bill Nelson said, that when he was in the senator, he actually looked at this data, and much of it is classified, and he thinks that scientists should look into this and figure out the nature of these objects that we don't understand. He could not understand, and that to me is very true. I mean, I resonated with his thinking, and as a result established the Galileo Project. And I think that as the leader of NASA, he pretty much sets the tone, and I think in the coming months and years, this subject will not be ridiculed the way it was in the past, and will deserve attention the way it should. Because if the government says there are objects in the sky that we don't fully understand, scientists should find out what these objects are. And, it's like a fishing expedition. It could be that all of the fish will be sardines, things that are either made by nature or made by humans. And if so, so be it. That's one of the objectives of the Galileo Project. We plan to build telescope systems that would basically get a high-resolution image of objects that are not birds, not drones or airplanes that look different, and also track them in a scientific way. And the data will be open; it will not be classified. And the only reason I was able to establish this project a few months ago was because people gave me donations that allow. By now, we have about 100 scientists engaged in this project.
Wow!
And the second part of this project, I should say, Galileo Project, is that we will look for objects that enter the solar system from outside within the orbit of the Earth that look weird, and they are called interstellar objects. And the first example for those is Oumuamua, this object discovered in 2017 on which my book is based. And that is the second part. And the goal is it's sort of like going on a date with someone you liked, but you never see that person again, and you want to find a similar person. And so we're trying to date another Oumuamua. And that's the second part of the Galileo Project. And hopefully, in the coming years, we'll have enough funding. We need about $100 million for the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena project. And so far, we have $2 million. And I hope that we will get there.
I will write a check. What can you just give us a quick rundown of exactly what that event was that took place that you're talking about, for those of us that might not be aware?
The object that I discuss in my book is called the Oumuamua because it was discovered in Hawaii by a telescope called Pan-STARRS. And Oumuamua means in the Hawaiian language a scout. It was the first object that we discovered near Earth that came from outside the solar system. And we knew that it came from outside because it moved too fast to be bound to the sun. And then astronomers said, well, it's probably a comet, just like the rocks that we have seen before in the solar system that are covered with ice. And when they get close to the sun, they evaporate, you see a cometary tail. The only problem is there was no cometary tail around this object, no gas or dust surrounding it. So it was definitely not a comet of the type that we have seen. And then as it was tumbling every 8 hours, the amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10. And that meant that it has a very extreme shape, most likely flat, pancake-like, because the reflected light changed in a way that resembles the reflection from a flat object at the 90% confidence. And then the object was also pushed away from the sun. And because there was no outgassing, no evaporation of it, the only explanation I could think of is that it's the reflection of sunlight that is pushing it. And then at that point, I suggested that because it has to be very thin, like a sail, so that it's pushed by sunlight, it might be artificial. It might have been produced by another civilization, and that's what led to this pushback from the scientists. But then a year ago, we found another object with the same telescope. We found another object that looks unusual, that was pushed by reflecting sunlight and had no cometary tail, the same qualities as Oumuamua.
Pushed by, like that's its propulsion?
No, so there was no evidence for propulsion. There was no evidence for gas coming out of it. And the only explanation I could think of is that it reflects sunlight and then being pushed by that, just like
nudged.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this new object, 2020 SO, was also pushed by sunlight and had no cometary tail. And then within a few weeks, the astronomers realized, it's actually a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. And we know that it's artificial and had the thin walls, and that's why it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. So we know that we produced 2020 SO, this object from a year ago. We don't know who produced Oumuamua.
And that was moving faster, right? The Oumuamua?
Yes, because 2020 SO came from Earth, and so it was moving relatively slowly. I mean, it was bound to the sun, and the other one, Oumuamua, was not bound to the sun. It came from outside. So
it came from outside the solar system, right?
Outside the solar system. Definitely not from us. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of going to ask you what the definition of that interstellar object was, and you just answered that.
Well, the definition is that it moves between stars, that it's not bound to any particular star.
Okay.
And of course, you could have rocks that are doing that. The solar system extends halfway to the nearest star, and there are rocks left over, just like Lego building blocks that were left over from the construction project of the planets. And that's called the Oort cloud that goes halfway to the nearest star. And so if a star passes near the solar system, it can easily dislodge some of these rocks into interstellar space. And you expect some interstellar rocks to come from the outskirts of other planetary systems like the solar system. But Oumuamua didn't look like those rocks. That's the issue. And so we want to find another one and then fly near it and take a close-up photograph, because they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write the book if we had an image.
So that was in 2017. How close was that to the New York Times coming out with the first big article about the Tic Tac? Like, was that before that or after that?
Well, it was around the same time. But
so you kind of got lost in the hoopla of all that, probably.
Well,
right?
honestly, at first I thought we were talking about that for a minute, because I come in, in blank, I come in cold, I don't read the book, or I just come in without any background so that I can sort of take it in and ask those questions. And for at the beginning, I thought that we were talking about that.
Yeah,
TikTok.
I was wondering about the timing. It seemed very coincidental.
It was a complete coincidence, because the New York Times was talking about the fact that there are objects identified by military personnel that the government knows about. And the one thing that resulted from that was the report to Congress on June 25th this year that in part inspired the Galileo Project that I established, because it has a branch associated with trying to figure out the nature of these objects that the government doesn't really know what they are. And I should say that just this week, the National Defense Bill in the US is being finalized, and it seems like it will have a recommendation to establish an office in government that will look into all the data that the government collected on unidentified aerial phenomena. And that's really the very first time that's something that Congress recommends doing that. And I think the most important aspect of that would be that the subject, instead of being ridiculed, will be taken more seriously. And obviously, many people in government do that because it's a matter of concern. If you have objects flying in the sky that you don't fully understand, you worry about national security. But if it's not produced by humans, it's not a matter of national security. It's an international matter.
True. All the data, though? I mean, let's hope they go through all the data, but they've been accumulating data for a few decades. Depending on who you ask, there's been a lot of data collected.
Right. I mean, we have to keep in mind that it's very likely to be a mixed bag, that there are all kinds of
compartments,
data of different quality, of different objects, some of which are natural, some of which are human-made. But the point is, even if there is good evidence for one object that is not human-made and not natural, that by itself will change the future of humanity. So it's really important to check each and every case. And the fact that most cases would have some mundane explanation, would not mean much. It's just like, in the case of Oumuamua, after that, there was another object discovered that looked like a comet from interstellar space. And it was given the name Borisov because it was discovered by a Russian amateur astronomer. And my colleagues asked me, okay, it looks like the second object discovered appears to be a comet of the type that we have seen before. Doesn't it convince you that Oumuamua is natural? And I said, when you walk down the beach and you see a plastic bottle, and you know that it's artificial. And if after that you see a rock, it doesn't make the plastic bottle a rock.
Yeah. So, because this does bring up the importance of trying to find near Earth objects as well that are going to hit the Earth, right? I mean, is that a whole separate science, or is that something that you guys will be taking part of as well? Because looking back now, there's a bunch of theories that the Younger Dryas was caused by, or partly caused or accelerated by, cometary impact. There's a lot of, like I was going to ask you even, what if Oumuamua hit the Earth? What would happen? Like how, it's hard to imagine. I think you said it was approximately maybe 10 meters wide. Not sure how thin it, 100 meters wide?
Yeah, it was roughly the size of a football field. And
right.
In terms of the thickness, we don't know. If it was indeed pushed by reflecting sunlight, it had to be less than a millimeter thick, very thin. But the one thing I should mention is that it was discovered because of the fear from impact by a rock. As you know, 66 million years ago, dinosaurs were roaming on Earth. They were dominant relative to their environment. They were very proud of themselves. And they were eating grass and didn't really look up. And then a big rock, the size of Manhattan Island, hit the ground and tarnished their ego trip. And so since then, we know that there is a risk from rocks hitting Earth. And even though that rock was, the size of Manhattan Island, we are worried even about smaller rocks than that. And in 2004, Congress tasked NASA to look for all objects bigger than the size of a football field that may hit the Earth, 90% of them. And one reason that the telescope that discovered Oumuamua was built, it's called Pan-STARRS, is to search for objects that may hit the Earth. These are called near-Earth objects. And it was constructed for that purpose. And there is another telescope that within 2 years will become operational. Its name is the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile. And that would find about 60% of all objects bigger than the size of a football field that could potentially come close to Earth. And so we are going 2/3 of the way towards the congressional task. But the point is that Pan-STARRS was constructed to look for objects of that size from the reflection of sunlight. And then it discovered an interstellar object, Oumuamua, even though it was not, coming very close to Earth. It was within a fifth of the Earth-Sun separation. But at the same time, it obviously surveyed the sky and looked for other objects. By the way, there is this tale about a fisherman that went to sea and came back and said, I discovered a new law of nature. All fish are bigger than 2 inches. And someone asked him, what is the size of the holes in your fishing net? And he said 2 inches. So that illustrates the fact that, if you have big holes in your fishing net, you will not catch any fish. And so Pan-STARRS was really the very first observatory that surveyed the sky and could see objects the size of a football field passing within the orbit of the Earth around the sun, just from the reflection of sunlight. And that means that before that, before 2010, we didn't have the capability of seeing something the size of a football field or smaller. And there could be a lot of objects smaller than that passing near Earth, and we wouldn't even notice. We never sent a spacecraft as big as a football field, to space. So the point is, we are pretty ignorant. And, if you go back 70 years, Enrico Fermi, a very famous physicist, was having lunch in Los Alamos, and he asked a question. He said, well, it looks likely that we are not alone. Probably, there are other planets like ours. But if so, where is everybody? And I think that's a very presumptuous question. It's just like sitting at home and saying, nobody is knocking on my door, therefore I don't have neighbors. That's not the right way to approach it. You have to look through your windows and search. And, only now we have the survey telescopes that allow us to search for things as big as a football field passing nearby. And by the way, if they move much faster than Oumuamua was moving, like if they move at a fraction of the speed of light, we wouldn't even pay attention to them because the astronomers would say, oh, this is just a fluke. It moves too fast. So my point is, we're not really searching. And that's what the Galileo Project is trying to do.
What do you think that if it's something less than 1 millimeter thick and it's like 100 meters long, so do you think it's some sort of debris or some sort of a probe, or what do you think we're dealing with here?
Yeah, so these are exactly the possibilities. You can imagine that it's the surface layer of a spacecraft that was torn apart. That's one example, or something that is defunct, not working anymore. But another possibility is that it's a receiver that is tumbling and collecting information, and because we didn't get enough data on this object, we don't really know what it is, and by now it's gone. It's 1 million times fainter than it was closer to the sun, and we can't really see it. We cannot chase it. It's moving too fast relative to our rockets. So what we need to do is find more of the same. And when I go to the kitchen and I see an ant, I usually get alarmed because there must be many more ants around. So there should be more objects like it, and we just need to search. And with the Vera Rubin Observatory, we'll find many more, I'm sure. And then the key would be to send a spacecraft with a camera that will pass nearby and take a close-up photo.
Do we have the tech for that now? Because I guess you'd see it coming soon enough that you'd be ready for it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so that's the plan that we are trying to make in the Galileo Project. And the issue is that it will really cost about $1 billion to have a space mission of this type.
Bezos could pay.
It's sort of, it's very expensive. So it's just like going on a date and trying to make a decision whether the person you are going with will be your partner for life, or you will have an offspring with. And that having an offspring is really a very tedious task. You want someone that has good genetic makeup and someone that will be a good companion. And, you need to collect enough information before you make such a decision. The other day, a couple of days ago, I was jogging early in the morning and I saw 4 pairs of ducks in a very narrow channel swimming and playing with each other. It looked like they're not dancing, but they're actually sort of wrestling. And it was clear that they're trying to decide whether to partner, to select one. These pairs were selecting whether to mate with each other. And it reminded me of the Galileo Project because, it's a difficult decision whether to run you can rephrase Hamlet's question. Instead of to be or not to be, you can say to rendezvous or not to rendezvous. That's $1 billion question, you see. So we have to be very selective, and we want to collect enough information that will demonstrate that the next Oumuamua indeed is weird. It's not a comet, it's not an asteroid, it looks unusual, and therefore we want to rendezvous with it. And to do that, we will send a spacecraft that we have ready with a camera. It will be expensive, but we hope to be able to do that. So in the coming months, we will start working on the design of the space mission, and this is the more expensive component of the Galileo project. The other part is looking at unidentified aerial phenomena, and for that we will just build telescope systems that are on Earth and look around. And the first among them actually is will be assembled in the coming months on the roof of the Harvard College Observatory. That's something I'm very excited about, that in the coming months we'll start to put together the first telescope system.
That's great. I mean, I was going to say that must be, in some ways, that decision is harder since the government is acknowledging this phenomena and this soft disclosure, because they're kind of saying, hey, there's something here right in our backyard. So it must be harder to go, outside the yard and explore the wilderness of space when you've got apparently a phenomenon going on right here. I mean, and that's kind of what the UFO community would always argue is like, hey, because it is, when you've looked into UFOs for so long, it's sometimes it's hard to hear the scientists still like Fermi and these guys, where are they? Well, there's thousands of people that say they're seeing stuff and making contact, and yet you're searching way out there for stuff,
Well, you see, the problem for many years was that the scientific community ridiculed the subject and ignored it. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to say, and I think it all echoes what Carl Sagan said. He said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And
I don't like that.
The problem with that is, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you say, well, we don't want to discuss this subject, and you're not funding the search, the scientific research into this, then you will not find the extraordinary evidence, and therefore you will still claim that there is no extraordinary evidence. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that there should be a supplement to Sagan's statement, which says extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. You need to fund the search, otherwise you wouldn't find anything. And that's what we are trying to do with the Galileo Project. And it's really the very first time that the team of scientists, more than 100 scientists, comes together to do a purely scientific research project. You see, before that, you had reports from the government. Other people looked into the reports. Some of the people studied the report, but nobody established a scientific research program that will, assemble new data that is open to the public, using state-of-the-art instrumentation, using telescopes, looking for the answers through telescopes. That's the motto of the Galileo Project, and that's what we are doing now. So I think, hopefully, it will, at the very least, change the atmosphere in the way that the scientific community regards this subject, because now we will be collecting scientific data of the highest quality, so nobody can dismiss it and say, oh, it's just military personnel, eyewitness testimonies. This will be open data that anyone can look at. And that's at the very least. But if we find evidence for something unusual, we will write scientific papers about it and try to bring it to the mainstream.
Have you ever thought, especially maybe someone like yourself that's a little more curious and open-minded, that there is thousands of groups all over the world that are actually like sort of meditating and looking up at the stars, and they see stuff, they think they make contact. Now, I don't know if that's ET or some interdimensional thing or whatever. I've experienced it myself, but maybe one of those 100 scientists or a few of them can go out and try and experience that with people.
Well, I should say that, you see, in physics, if we want to convince the mainstream in science that these things are real, we cannot do it with using humans as detectors. That doesn't work. So you cannot write a scientific paper saying, someone
we saw
told
this,
me that I witnessed something. This does not hold water. You need to use instruments in order for it to be scientific. That's the standard folklore. Now, I'm not saying that humans cannot identify things that are real. I'm just saying that although it holds water in the courtroom, you can have eyewitness testimonies that lead to putting a person in jail. That happens in the courtroom. In the scientific research folklore, it's not an acceptable piece of evidence, and you cannot write a scientific paper based on what humans are reporting. What you need to do is use instruments that are recording the evidence, so anyone can look at that, and that's for that you need to use, for example, in the context of the Galileo Project, telescopes with cameras that will take a video of the sky, that will record audio, sound from the sky, and then we can analyze it. And if we see it's not a philosophical question. If we see an object that has screws and bolts on it, and if we have a megapixel image of it, and it doesn't say made in China, doesn't say made in Russia, it says made on exoplanet Y, then that's it. You don't need any, it's not a matter of debate anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wasn't thinking that. I was kind of only half joking, but and not for data collection, but just for more of a like inspiration, or like, hey, look what
people can get their inspiration in many different ways, and I have no issue with that. But I think what's important right now is to collect evidence and data that would bring us to an understanding of what unidentified aerial phenomena are, what objects like Oumuamua are. Yeah. And as I said, the mistake that a lot of people make, including a lot of scientists, is to assume that they know the answer before they collect the evidence. And again, it reminds me of those dinners as a kid, where the adults in the room would pretend that they are respectable, they know everything, and they would give some answers that do not make sense. And the only way to find the answer is the way a kid finds the answer. A kid goes and tries to get the evidence himself, on his or her own by, and sometimes kids get bruised as a result, but at least they know it for sure from their own experience, what's going on. They don't need someone to tell them what's going on. Yeah. And that's the way science should be done, by collecting evidence and figuring out what it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things I loved about your book is you're pretty hardcore against the dogmatic, the scientism that's happening right now, the dogma, the people that you can even see it with young people coming up, and they don't necessarily want to follow this sort of curious route because it may not be as easy for them to get jobs in the future. I mean, there's all kinds of examples you use, which is fantastic.
But it's not just that. I wanted to emphasize there is another element here, which is, let me give you an example. The mainstream of physics invested $10 billion in an accelerator called the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. And the main goal was to discover new particles that are called the supersymmetric particles. And, it was accepted by the mainstream that these particles might be around the corner, we might find them, and they convinced each other that we should invest $10 billion to search for them. And we searched and didn't find any. So that was accepted as part of the mainstream, $10 billion to search for those particles. But in addition, I mean, it's obviously a matter of having those funding agencies listening to the advice of committees made of mainstream scientists that are building consensus among themselves. Okay,
like for multiple universe, dark matter, string theory. Yeah. I mean, all these things, instead of putting their money where you are, which is actually like a tangible thing.
Yeah, and but my point is that there are other things to consider. For example, how interested is the public in the question that you're trying to resolve? The public funds science. We need to listen to the public. The second is, what would be the impact of finding what you are aiming to find on society? And then the third thing is, what is the magnitude of the improvement in our knowledge of reality? And if you include these in consideration, then it's clear that looking for equipment produced by other civilizations in space is much more consequential. It's much more important than looking for supersymmetric particles, And nevertheless, for example, even the Galileo project that was just announced has funding that is 2 parts in 10,000 of the funding of the Large Hadron Collider. So you ask yourself, how did we get there? How is it possible that a subject that the public cares a lot about is not funded at all, being ridiculed by the scientific community who decides to pursue things that end up not being real? Like supersymmetry is not around the corner. We invested $10 billion in that. And the searches for dark matter, hundreds of millions of dollars, we didn't find specific types of particles that were proposed. And my point is, given the public's interest, given the anomalies of Oumuamua or unidentified aerial phenomena, I think it's time, the time is right to invest funds, $1 billion, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars in the search for objects produced by other civilizations, because we have some tentative clues that maybe are quite intriguing, and we want to find out what these objects are. And obviously we will not have extraordinary evidence that they are something else unless we put the money into the search. And to me, it's a matter of common sense. I don't feel myself as in an elevated position relative to the public, or I just speak what sounds to me like common sense. And I think the public very much understands that. It's just that the academic world has difficult time following it.
Well, we need people like you to bridge between the public and the academic world and the scientific community. I mean, that's always what's frustrated me about the UFO phenomena, is not that the government acknowledges anything, it's the scientific community and the academia that acknowledge that there's a mystery. They don't, you don't have to know the answers, just that there's some questions to be asked here. So,
and not only questions, but we have the instruments that we can use to find the answer. You see, so why not? We are buying them with the Galileo Project. We are buying them off the shelf. These are, we need to assemble them in a special way because, for example, there are observatories that astronomers constructed that are looking at the sky. So you may ask, why aren't they seeing UFOs? Well, the answer is simple. If a bird flies above an observatory that exists right now, nobody would track it. The astronomers would just ignore it. What you need is a system that has, first of all, looks at the entire sky, not in a narrow field, and then tracks objects of interest, and then zooms on them and tries to get a high-resolution image of them. And for that, you need also artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms to identify objects, to say whether it's a bird, a drone, or an airplane, or something else. And all of this was never developed before. So that's what the Galileo Project is trying to do.
Well, you've also been involved in all these other sort of paradigm-changing initiatives. I mean, you also talked about the Black Hole Initiative in your book. And and you guys were trying to decide whether you can see a city like Tokyo if it was on Pluto. And I mean, the search for exoplanets is something else that might interest people if you give us an update on that. And then also the light sail thing. I mean, that's a whole other thing that could really... that seems very economical for what you're going to get out of it, the amount of resources to put into that, right?
Yeah, well, let me give you another example. So the astronomy community every decade decides about its priorities. And one of the biggest priorities right now is to look for signatures of life in the atmosphere of other planets around other stars that may be habitable, maybe there is life on them. And you might want to look for oxygen or methane in the atmosphere that indicates life. And that's what everyone agrees on. And it motivates future telescopes that will cost maybe $10 billion within a few decades, maybe built in space. But my point is simple, and I wrote a paper about it in 2015. In principle, if you find oxygen, it will not necessarily tell you that there is life because there are natural ways of making oxygen. Also, if you don't find oxygen, it doesn't tell you that there is no life there because the Earth in the first 2 billion years of its lifetime didn't have oxygen in the atmosphere, and there was microbial life on Earth. And so if you don't find oxygen, even for Earth, there was a 50% chance that if you looked at Earth early on, you wouldn't find oxygen. So it doesn't mean that there is no life. But if you find very complex molecules like CFCs that air conditioning systems or in that industries produce on Earth, these are all the complex molecules that are destroying the ozone, that are associated with industrial pollution. So if you find industrial pollution in the atmosphere of another planet, not only you know that there is life there, but you know that there is industrial life there. And what I'm saying is, you put $10 billion towards a future telescope, why not discuss how likely it is for you, or how easy it is for this telescope to detect industrial pollution instead of oxygen. But for some reason, that is not being discussed. That is pushed to the sidelines, and because it's considered speculative to discuss a possible industrial civilization. And I don't think that it's speculative, because it's arrogant on our behalf to think that we are special, unique. Whenever we thought that way, we were wrong. We thought that we are at the center of the universe, and that turned out to be wrong. We're not at the center of anything, actually. We thought that that the Earth-Sun system is really special, and that's wrong. Actually, half of the Sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly the same separation, so it's not unique or special. We are not privileged, and just thinking that we are the smartest kid on the block makes no sense to me. It's just like my daughters thought that they are the smartest when they were at home, and then when they went to the kindergarten, they realized that there are smarter kids around. So I don't think it makes sense for us to believe as the starting assumption that nothing like us exists out there. Instead, we should start from scratch and basically say, okay, well, we are not really special, unique. Let's just check. Let's just see if we sent out equipment to space, in the form of spacecraft. Let's check if there was someone before us, let's say 1 billion years before us, that sent equipment to space that we can find. Why is that regarded speculative? Why is that pushed to the sidelines relative to searching for supersymmetry that we've never found, searching for specific types of dark matter that we've never found? I argue these things are actually not very relevant for the daily lives of people, not very relevant for the future of our society. The dark matter will not be used for any gadget that we build on Earth. So if we find technological equipment from another civilization, it might give us a look at our future. It might change the way we live, the way we aspire about going to space, the technologies we develop in response to what we find. I would, my wish is that we will find a gadget coming from another civilization, and I'll be able to press some buttons on it.
Yeah, and it'll change the paradigm of the whole planet. I mean, it'll change everything, right? Like you mentioned in your book, it'll create a whole bunch of new disciplines, Astro.
How can we ignore that?
Yeah.
How is it possible? Not only ignoring that, but ridiculing the discussion in that. I just find it completely inappropriate, and that's why I wrote my book, and that's why I'm advocating for this cause.
And how's your book come across to a lot of your peers in the scientific community?
Well, many of them try to dismiss it. I don't know how many read it, but the point is, I don't need to argue my case, because when the mainstream scientific community tried to explain the anomalies of Oumuamua, there were 4 independent teams that came up with different explanations. One of them said, it's probably a cloud of dust particles that is 100 times less dense than air. And the problem with that is, if it were to get close to the sun, it would disintegrate, because the material strength will not be enough to keep it together as it gets heated by hundreds of degrees. Then there was a suggestion, maybe it's a hydrogen iceberg, a chunk of frozen hydrogen. We've never seen anything like it. Moreover, hydrogen will evaporate very quickly. It will not survive the journey in interstellar space. Then there was a suggestion, maybe it's a nitrogen iceberg, a chip of frozen nitrogen that was chipped off the surface of a planet like Pluto around another star. And the problem there is there isn't enough nitrogen to accommodate enough chips such that Oumuamua will be one of them. So my point is, if all the explanations that people came up with for a natural origin involve something that we've never seen before, I rest my case. If it's something that we've never seen before, we might as well consider an artificial origin. And, it's just like a caveman finding a cell phone. The caveman is used to playing with rocks all of his life, and he would think the cell phone must be just a rock of a type that he had never seen before. That's exactly the approach that my colleagues were taking. But if he would throw away the rock or the cell phone, that would be the end of it. But if he will press a button and that would record his voice, and press another button, it would record his image, then it will become clear that it's not a rock. And that's really what I hope to do with the Galileo Project, get more evidence.
Yeah, I'm glad you went into more details on the Oumuamua, because from the book you get a sense of how much data you guys did have. I mean, I know you didn't have quite enough for proof, but you had enough to say it's not all of these things,
Right.
Yeah.
And I cited in my book about 200 scientific papers that I wrote. And then one of the criticisms by a scientist, someone who calls himself a scientist, was that I cited papers that I wrote. And I thought to myself, why would that be criticism? Because if I didn't cite any papers, then people would say what he's saying is not substantiated. Okay? So I'm substantiating what I say based on papers that I wrote. And then he's criticizing that as if I reference myself. So the point is, you cannot win. If someone wants to basically dismiss it, they can do it. I mean, the reason we call it the Galileo Project is because 4 centuries ago, there was the first modern scientist, Galileo Galilei, who argued that the Earth moves around the sun. And the philosophers at the time thought that it's ridiculous. Just like Oumuamua being an artificial object is ridiculous. So they put him in house arrest. And he said, look through my telescope and you will also understand what I'm arguing for. And they said, we don't need to look through your telescope. We know the answer. And they tried to prevent him from speaking to other people by putting him in house arrest. And today they would have canceled him on social media. And what did they accomplish? During their time, they felt very powerful. And poor guy, he couldn't speak with anyone about what he found and so forth. But 4 centuries later, here we are developing space missions based on our knowledge that the Earth moves around the sun. So the fact that they insisted didn't change the motion of the Earth around the sun. It only maintained their ignorance. Nobody remembers the names of those philosophers, but everyone remembers the name of Galileo. So my point is, reality is whatever it is. It doesn't need to be liked on Twitter. It's not a matter of popularity. I don't need the endorsement of my colleagues for something to be true. If there are objects passing near Earth that came from another civilizations, it doesn't matter what my colleagues say. All we need to do is collect enough evidence such that I would know for sure what they are, and that would be enough for me. I don't need to convince everyone, because if that's the reality we live in, it will not change. The fact that we bury our head in the sand will not change what's around us. The fact that we don't look through our windows will not change the fact that we have neighbors.
Yeah. Do you have any questions there at all?
What do you think? So if you had to make a prediction, do you think that with the Galileo Project and NASA sort of with their new stuff and the satellites looking for near Earth objects
and the Congress thing,
yeah, do you think it's inevitable? Do you think do you think it's sort of just a waiting, or do you think we'll get Tunguska first, or what do you think?
I think that if we collect the data, and the Galileo Project is funded at the level that it needs, and we get scientific data, and perhaps the government introduces more transparency, I think within a decade or two, we will learn a lot. And it will just be a completely new realization. Now, it's possible that we will end up finding that another nation was much more sophisticated than we think, and that they produced all kinds of gadgets we've never known about, or that there are natural phenomena like Oumuamua was a nitrogen iceberg, something that we've never considered before, and it appears to be very common. There could be situations like that. We will find out. My guess is, if it looks weird, it will be weird.
Speaking of weird, didn't they just see something weird on Mars? Or sorry, on the moon, on the far side of the moon?
Well, yeah, there was a report that the Chinese spacecraft that landed there noticed something that looks with a weird shape, but the image is very poor resolution, so it could be it could be just a rock that is not fully resolved. They need to get closer to figure out what it is.
Yeah, they need to get some high-res pictures of those bases on the dark side of the moon.
China doesn't have high-res.
That's my point all along.
It's just a knockoff
high
Sony
resolution,
on there.
a megapixel image will tell us what things are. It's completely pointless to argue because it's not a philosophical question. You just get a good resolution image. And using cell phones to look at UAP, is not really the best way to figure them out. What you want is a large enough telescope that will get us a crisp image. And that's what we're planning to put together.
Yeah, it's just like when you see the moon or some other thing, you're thinking, oh, I'll take a great picture of that. And you take it and it's hardly... On the phones, it just doesn't do it justice,
Yeah, because optics tells you that it all depends on the size of the aperture of your camera. And cell phones have an aperture that is only a few millimeters in size. It's really small. And
that's
telescopes, can be tens of centimeters, much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And then you get much higher resolution image.
Speaking of philosophical questions, what about a past civilization? What if it was from some weird pre-Atlantean or pre-Diluvian, antediluvian Atlantean sort of? Because isn't there some weird, what about that Black Knight thing? Isn't there some sort of weird thing orbiting Earth that
the Black Knight satellite?
Yeah. Is that real?
Well, so that's another thing that, if you imagine that there might have been someone before us on Earth, some advanced technological civilization, let's say that destroyed itself more than 100 million years ago, we would never find evidence for it on the surface of the Earth, like in archaeological digs, because over periods of hundreds of millions of years, geological activity destroys anything on the surface and mixes it with the inside of the Earth. So we won't be able to find it. But if they launched any equipment into space, it will still be there. So, if we search, we will not assume that there is nothing. We will just look for whatever there is. And if they sent equipment into space, we might find it.
Among the 30,000 other pieces floating around up there? Didn't you mention that in your book?
There's just one. Hey, wait, this one's not ours.
30,000, eh?
But and another thing to keep in mind, the moon is like a museum because it doesn't have geological activity, it doesn't have mixing. So
okay, so you mentioned the moon. I gotta
survey the moon. We might find something.
I gotta ask you about the moon. What about? Because there's a lot of crazy stuff going on with the moon, right? Then maybe I'm wrong about some of this stuff, and you can correct me. You're probably know more about this than me, but I've heard and researched myself and heard from some reputable people. And the obvious one is that the moon and the sun appear the same size in the sky, even though the sun's 400 times further away.
That's a coincidence.
Yeah. So then what about, the other one is what is the other one? It's
the size difference.
It takes 27.3 days for the moon to do a full rotation.
Right.
And the moon is 27.3% the size of the Earth. And it takes three.
I'll give you another one.
Okay.
If you look at the sunspots, they look very similar to the spots on the nearest stars, Alpha Centauri A and B, which are just like they have roughly the mass of the sun, and so there are some interesting coincidences. The way that the astronomers treat them is as coincidences. But I actually saw a scientific paper trying to find a physical, scientific reason for why the moon occupies roughly the same size in the sky as the sun, related to tidal forces. But there could be a reason for that.
I'll give you one more. It takes 366.2, actually 259, but 366.25 days for the Earth to do a full orbit around the sun, or something. And the Earth is 366.2% the size of the moon. Because I go back and forth. Is it like a weird coincidence because it's weird to have all these sort of things line up, or are they rounding it sort of weird, or is it like, and then there's the 108th thing with those sort of things, or is it just like it's just a bunch of NASA's a bunch of crazy occultists?
You know what? If we make contact, encounter,
they'll know
another being, we can ask them. Maybe they know. If they're smarter than we are, why don't we ask them? I think that's the great advantage of finding a smarter kid on your block, because there are questions to which we don't have answers. Maybe they will have the answers. So I will keep your question in mind and ask it if we find them.
Hopefully they're benevolent.
Well, why aren't we looking closer at the moon? Like, why can't, I mean, we've got all these projects now. We want to go farther out. How come we're not setting up a base around the moon?
It would be worth it, right? Like you said, it's like a time capsule to start like busting some dust off and excavating.
Yeah, so NASA has a plan to go back to the moon called Artemis, and it was not realized yet. But having a base on the moon and surveying the surface of the moon would be a worthwhile task. And you need to be close to the surface to see things. If you look at it from a distance, you can't see very small things.
The trick is they got to take a bunch of like people from Jersey and load them all up on the rocket, and then we'll film it all like it's got to be like a reality television, because I feel like that's part of the problem, is just like the general populace is just hard to convince us that it's worth all the money and all the effort. And
well, you don't need to send people. You can send the robots or instruments that will just go.
I could think of some people. I could think of some people. We could make a list.
So how do people
track you down if they want to find the book? Do you have a website? Are you on any social media?
So I have a website. If you put my name in Google, Avi Loeb and Harvard University, then you will find my website. And on it, there is a link to my book. Actually, there were 2 books this year that I published, and also to my commentaries, my essays that appear every few days. Some of the things we discussed are mentioned in my most recent commentaries, and I'm now starting to work on my next book, and stay tuned, it will be interesting.
That's great. So did you kind of break away from academia in a way, and just are you going rogue here a little bit with your own research and all that, or and all these projects, or are you still So
I was asked at Harvard, but as soon as I established the Galileo Project, whether that's part of my day job.
Yeah.
And I said, throughout my career as an astronomer, I was interpreting data that was collected by telescopes. Okay, and that's what the Galileo Project is doing. We are collecting data with telescopes and trying to interpret it. And in astronomy, there is no limit on how close an object could be and still be of interest. We are studying the sun, we study meteors, cosmic rays that get through the Earth's atmosphere, and asteroids and comets. So it's really part of my day job, and they agreed. So it's just a different project than what was pursued by other astronomers in the past. That's all. But on the other hand, we have a chance of finding something new.
Yeah.
So I'm not really breaking off. I'm just going on a new path, a new road, a road not taken. And I'm continuing to publish scientific papers. And this year, I'm actually on sabbatical. the first one in 19 years, because I was the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for 9 years, actually, the longest serving chair. And I finished my term last year and decided to take a year off, a sabbatical, for the first time in 19 years. So
Nice.
That's what gives me a lot of freedom to do creative work.
Just
Yeah,
in
that's
time for
great.
lockdown.
Yeah.
Are you? Can people support Project Galileo somehow? Is there any sort of crowdfunding?
So
Or
we have a website. The Galileo Project has a website that you can get to by typing Galileo Project Harvard, and in it there is a link to a website where people can donate funds if they want, and also a link for any volunteers that might be interested in contributing their expertise to the project.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for your time. This has been great. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for the excellent questions.
Yeah, thanks. All right.
right on,
See you
Avi.
later.
Thanks for coming on the show. Come back anytime, and
Yeah, well,
good luck with the Galileo project.
And looking forward to your next book, too.
While you're at it, prove that the Earth is round too, so that I can just get this off my back.
If we find an interesting fish, I'll bring it.
Perfect. Right on. Thanks, Avi.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
And that was our chat with Avi Loeb. What'd you think? Look
Yeah.
at that. Look at that screensaver. Madison fixed it
Yeah,
for us.
that
She came
was-
down here
that
the
was
one day
good.
and
Oh,
she's
look
like,
at that.
oh
It's
my
beautiful,
God. She's
yeah.
like, why is that on the TV?
Yeah.
So she
Yeah,
fixed
it was
it.
good. Yeah, it was good. I mean, I was kind of hoping he'd get in, because one of the projects he was working on that he talks about in the book, but he didn't get into here, is this light sail project with and Larry Milner. Do you remember Milner? I don't know if his name was Larry Milner. It was he's the Russian entrepreneur. Remember? Do you remember years ago when we started the podcast on, there was that Russian entrepreneur that was putting all this money into finding UFOs? Do you remember hearing about that? Well, he was working with Avi on the light sail project, and then he also mentions this black hole project that they're trying to figure out, because they said they've never really taken a picture of a black hole yet, so they're trying to find that.
How do you take a picture of a black hole?
You just find it.
Oh, you know what? Just take pictures of space and then do the negative thing.
There you go. Just flip them over. No, there's a bunch of dust, cosmic dust, that circles
Just
around
on
the
way
hole,
in.
and
Shouldn't
it's
it be getting
fi-
sucked in?
That's the
It's
event
like the
horizon.
taint.
That's the event horizon. So,
It's a cosmic room
but that's
job.
what they can see is the dust. You just ruined like Harvard scientists.
Well,
like,
you won't listen this
podcast.
far.
Hopefully, all the no, I won't say.
All the what?
All the people who shut it off before that.
Why?
I'm just kidding.
I just
all good.
made him
It's all
laugh.
good.
Why are you so against laughter, Dunlop? Big thanks to Avi for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you're one of the 1%, the 1 in 100 that chooses to support our work here over in Grimerica. If you want to join the ranks, head over to grimerica.ca/support today. Make a one-time donation, sign up for a monthly, maybe give us a little Christmas bonus, a little year-end bonus after a couple tough COVID years. But we are growing. 2022 is looking great. We got a full slate of event calendars. We'll be launching our first 2023 event right away here. Join the chats, grimerica.ca/chats. Get the audiobooks. Graham's done 28. Well, actually, Joe did a couple.
Yeah.
It's 28 audiobooks because ISIS Unveiled is now submitted. So it could be live any day, which is a 28th title. Head over to adultbrain.ca. Check out Occult Worlds out now. There's a whole bunch of them. Grab an audiobook. I think that's it.
We should do a
Spam
show.
Graham.
Maybe we should just do a show one day, just talking about all the books and going through them all. People kind of suggested we should do that,
You could just.
but maybe in smaller blurbs. But I don't know.
Well, you
It's
read
just-
them all. I can't.
I know.
I don't have a lot to
you
contribute.
Yeah, you
I could-
could contribute your presence.
I'll start
you
saving
could hold
the-
space for me.
Oh, I'm not a good space holder. I'll start saving some bloopers.
There you go.
Fuck. The other day I was editing and you were like on the phone for a while.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was probably the pet emergency.
I think it was like on
happening.
speaker too. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I feel like I don't need to listen to any of this.
I was like, I moved over. I was like, check.
Anyway, grammarca.ca/support. Do all that other stuff in the show notes. We love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the live show.
Thanks for watching live. Yeah.
Oh, you can't see us. No, we're out. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the live show. We'll be back next week, I think. Next Wednesday? We're back next Wednesday.
Oh, no, we're back Sunday, actually.
We're back on
We have on Sunday. Sunday at like 3 our time.
Yes, Sunday.
Then,
We're talking synchro bacon.
Yeah.
Bacon?
As in Francis Bacon.
Oh.
The immaculate conceived occult scientist.
Huh. Interesting. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the live show.